In this video, we take a look at the use of basic file handling operations. So to explore the various operations you need to be able to use, we're going to use this program you see on the screen, and we're going to start with how you read data from text files. So this program asks for the name of a character, and then it looks up the name of that character in a text file, and it outputs all of that character's attributes, in this case their health, their stamina and their hunger, which are integers. So you can think of this as a little text-based game. You can see on the left the code for this program, and you can see on the right the text file that stores the information. You can see it stores the information in a very specific way. We have the name of a character, Boris, followed by three numbers, 34, 57 and 12, which represent the health, stamina and hunger for the character Boris. Our program, as you can see, requires the items from the text file to be in a very certain order. We require the name to be in the text file first, followed by three numbers, and those numbers have to be in the right order. The first one's the health, the next is the stamina, and the next is hunger. This structure that's very precise and has to be followed in the text file is known as data dependency. If the order of these were changed around in the text file, the computer program would give undesired output or may not even work. So first we ask the user which character they would like to output. So we have a simple input command. Which character you'd like to output, they type in the name of the character and that gets stored in the variable character. We then reach the first of our file handling operations that you need to be aware of for the exam, and that's open. So we have a line here that says f equals open characters.txt, r. And you can see the open command takes two parameters. The first is the name of the file it wants to open, in this case characters.txt. The second parameter it takes is what we want to do with the file. So in Python, when you say R, it means we want to open the file for reading. The next thing we do is set a Boolean variable to false to indicate that we haven't yet reached the end of the file. And this is important. All text files and file handling operations have a way of telling when they've reached the end of a file, and it's quite common to check whether we've reached the end. We then iterate through the file while we haven't reached the end of the file. Now, we will change this end of file flag to true later on if we discover we have reached the end of the file. We then have 4 lines of code which read 4 lines from the text file, one after the other. Each line from the text file is placed into an appropriate variable. So we see name equals f, and that was assigned earlier as being a pointer to character.txt. f.readLine, so read a line from character.txt and place it into the variable name. You'll notice on the end it has this dot strip, which is a Python thing, and that's because every time you were entering a line of text into the text file, at the end you were pressing enter. Now, although when you press the enter key on a keyboard you don't see anything, behind the scenes it's actually storing a character which represents the fact there's a new line. So we strip this new line character out, so we just get the text Boris. We proceed with that for all 4 lines, reading in the 3 numbers and storing each line of that text file in health, stamina and the variable hunger. We then now check if the character we read in from the file is indeed the one we're looking for. So, was the name supplied at the beginning of this program Boris? And if it was, it matches, we then print out the contents of the variables. We've essentially extracted them from the text file, put them into variables which are being held in memory, and then printed the contents of those variables out to the screen. If the name we read in contains no data, then we know we've reached the end of the file. And if this is the case, we set our end of file flag to true, which will cause the while loop to terminate. And then finally, we close the file. So we say f.close. Remember, f is pointing to characters.txt. It's our link, it's our file handler, which is connecting our program to our text file. So we say file.close. Now this is really important and a step that candidates often forget in the exams. It's also often a step that will gain you an easy mark. Once you're finished dealing with a file, you should close it and free up the resources. So that's reading from a text file, but how do you use file handling operations to write to a text file? Well, we've got a slightly different program here. The first thing you can see is we get the user to input the details for a character and we store those in variables in memory. So we ask the user for the name, health, stamina and hunger of the character, and we're storing the values entered into 4 variables in memory. The next thing we have to do is to create a connection or a link between our program and our physical file characters.txt. So like before, we say f equals open, and then we supply 2 parameters, the name of the file we want to connect to, in this case characters.txt, and now we're supplying the second parameter a, and a means we want to append or add to the end of that file. Another option in Python is to use the parameter w. Now this would create a brand new file or overwrite the contents of an existing file. Now we've gathered the input from the user and we've created the link to characters.txt and told it we want to append to the end of the file, we can now write the contents of each variable held in memory onto a new line into the character text file. And you can see we do this with f.write. You'll notice I'm writing a variable plus /n, and that is a new line character. So it's as if you had manually entered the information and then pressed enter. Just like when we read to the file, once we're done, we close the file and you do f.close. So just to recap, the stages to write data to a file are open the file for creating or overwriting or appending to a file, write the data to the file and close the file. The stages to read data from a file are open the file for reading, assign a Boolean variable to false to indicate the end of the file is not reached, and while the end of the file is false and the search item is not found, then read the data from the file. If the data matches what was being searched for, assign the data to variables or output. Check if the end of the file has been reached, and if it has, assign the Boolean variable to true, and again, close the file. So all of the commands we've just been going through have been shown to you in Python. Now in the exam, any code presented to you in the papers will be written in the OCR exam reference language, and this syntax is slightly different to Python or maybe another language you've been learning. As you can see from the table in the top right, the commands are incredibly similar, but the syntax is slightly different. Now don't panic too much. If you're asked to write code in your exam, you can write it in either the OCR exam reference language or the language that you've been using. One thing to notice that is quite different to Python and indeed many other languages is how OCR will represent the concept of opening a file. You can see in the table in the top right, it's the word open followed by brackets, and in the brackets you just supply a file name. Simple as that. In Python, we supplied the file name plus another parameter that said whether you were reading, writing or appending to the file. In the exam, using the OCR exam reference language, they will just say open and then supply the name of the text file. So their open command can be used to either read or write to the file. But as I said, whichever method you use, it will be fine for the purpose of your exams.